we should say a few words about before we talk a little bit more about the aspects of love that we need to mention. Love, we had talked about previously in the first section about this idea of joy and pleasure and the confusion between the two, right? Love is something that is a complex experience. Love is something that ultimately is mixed up with a lot of different types of emotions. And in any particular relationship, these emotions go through a wide variety of different experiences. You couldn't, in fact, even from the point of meeting someone, right, and having this relationship develop more and more deeply, the experiences or the emotions that we talk about love, if we think about them, we would describe them in different ways. And as this relationship continues over time, right, the relationship becomes the initial intensity of the relationship, or of what we would call love, seems to wane in its at least in terms of its novelty. But there are these emotions, and this roller coaster really of emotions is associated with love. But I would say that even though we call them love, and this is really what most of the poetry, not all, most poetry or most of songs and such focus on, are the feelings. The feelings are really the fruit of love, or the fruit of aspects of love. Sometimes the feelings that we call love are closer to pleasures than they are to real, authentic love. What we have to recognize then is that when we talk about love, the more real love is, the more authentic love is, the more the emotions will move from things that seem more like pleasure to authentic joy. Right? And we'll be able to experience that. The joy will continue after the encounter with our beloved is over, right? I mean, in a particular instance. In very early stages, right, especially before we're sure about this commitment to a relationship, it will seem more like pleasure, because not very soon after leaving the person, we're going to start to wonder. And we're going to start to have the feelings of joy will start to abate. We will start to wonder whether or not there's a real commitment. And so we end up needing much more time with that other person. Right? As the feelings deepen, right, or as the love deepens, the feelings will become much more part of who it is that we are in the real sense, the authentic sense of joy. What underlies all of this, though, is what love at its very root is. Like faith, like hope, love ultimately has to be an act of the will. It does, right? If it's not primarily an act of the will, that all of these other experiences revolve around, then it can't be love. Right? We're commanded to love God with our whole heart, our whole soul, our whole self, right? And to love our neighbor as ourselves. You can't be commanded to feel a particular way. You can be commanded to act in a particular way. Okay, so it's an act of love, but what does this act of love entail? Okay, I love you, but I'm not sure what that means, right? I mean, we have a vague sense of what it means, but unless we ask ourselves more deeply what it really means, we will always fall short in reaching the goal that we have, which is ultimately to a full communion, a perfect communion with God and with one another. There are a couple of places in Scripture that we can look that give us a sense of what love is. And it's not a lot different than what we have talked about with regard to faith and hope. One of these is in John chapter 15. In John 15, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he's talking about love. And he's describing ultimately what love means. In John chapter 15, this is before Jesus is about to suffer his passion. And he's describing to his disciples what it is that he expects of them. And he says, "This is my commandment for you, that you love one another as I have loved you." And what is that love? He says, "Greater love has no man than this, to lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends." This is ultimately love. Love is this act of total self-gift. And Jesus is talking about this in terms of laying down his life for one another, right? This act of total self-gift. This is really ultimately what love is. It's an act of total self-gift, a giving of ourselves to the other, really for their own sake. Now, it may not necessarily be this act of the cross that Jesus does for us. It might be. But there are many other ways that we can experience this love, we can manifest this love. Mark talks about one of them as well. Mark's gospel cites this experience that Jesus has with his disciples. They're sitting there looking at the treasury, right, within the temple. And the treasury is where people put their money in, right, for the upkeep of the temple, for the upkeep of the religious institutions within Israel. And Mark recounts the event this way. He says, "And Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and watched the multitude putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums, and a poor widow came and put in 2 copper coins, which make a penny. And he called his disciples to him, and he said to them, 'Truly I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all of those who were contributing to the treasury. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything that she had, her whole living.'" Now, this might seem a little bit mundane, right? But this is actually a manifestation, really, of what love is. I mean, it's trust, but it's love, right? This act of total self-gift. She gave back to God everything, and I mean everything, right, in the worldly sense, that he had given to her. We will see why this act of total self-gift makes sense as we go along. But ultimately, what we call love is an act of total self-gift. It's hard to describe how this act of total self-gift needs to manifest itself in any kind of particular relationship, because different relationships demand different types of giving, right? Different relationships demand a certain type of giving of oneself to the other for their own sake, a disinterested self-gift. We have greater obligations to those who are biologically related to us, right, than we do to those who are not, in one sense. We have greater responsibilities to our families, right, our biological families, than we do to those that are outside. We have greater obligations to those who share the faith with us than we do to those who do not. But ultimately, we have an obligation to everyone. Now, what is it that all of these things have in common? Well, ultimately, whatever that obligation, however that obligation is manifested, ultimately what it means, right, to be an act of total self-gift is that we will enact for the good of the other for their own sake. right? Regardless of what it does for us. The more disinterested it is, right? The more we act in such a way that we are motivated by that person's good, the more we get out of it. This is the way we are created. This is really the way we experience authentic joy. But this is authentic love. The greater we can give ourselves, the more selflessly that we can give ourselves, regardless of what it is, right? It has to do first with an attitude, right, and then an act. It's a willing, and then acting in ways that are appropriate. But we do it selflessly. We do it because we want this other person's perfection. And we'll talk more about what we mean by their perfection in later sessions. So this is really the foundation of communion. The foundation of human communion, but ultimately this foundation of communion with those persons, right? God, for whom we were created. Faith, hope, and love. Right? And as St. Paul says, the greatest of these, the one that is necessary, without which the other two have no meaning, right? No efficacy, is love. They all come together, but they are all three human, right? They're all three human, but they all three have the capacity to be supernaturalized, divinized, to be able to allow us to love and to give ourselves, to trust in ways that go beyond simple human limitations, beyond really simple human capacities.